learning opportunity about how to have a civil and productive civic conversation. And this is something that we so greatly need. And I'm so glad that Dr. Liz called me and said, we need this, I want to do this. And I said, yes, 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 please go do it. So tonight I would like to introduce Dr. Liz Hall. She's a retired college professor, and she has a private practice called Skills for Success. And she's been a career counselor and a life coach. As a presenter for Learning Quest, Liz enjoys teaching about self-help topics, politics, including leadership, poverty, social trends, foreign policy, and Asian American lessons. She served as programs chair for Democratic Women a number of years ago and has spoken to this group on 2 other occasions. Could we welcome Dr. Liz Hall?
I really am pleased to be here because, like all the rest of you, I am stressed with what's going on in the nation. And I will preface my comments tonight by saying, like you, I don't care for Donald Trump's persona, philosophy, or political actions. I have recently found myself making unladylike comments. And well, that's cause for humor and raises blood pressure and doesn't do much to solve the problem. In fact, it makes us part of the problem. And so that is why I enjoy doing this. I actually taught how to have a productive philosophical conversation 6 years ago because I wasn't sure the world or I was ready to talk about politics. Now I am sure, and we must do this. I will just make a few general comments about how we came to where we are today. George Washington, our first president, was a man of the Enlightenment, and he believed in the premise, "Come, let us reason together." And it didn't take him very long to realize that even back then it was a problem. Probably all of us have seen that Sunday school picture of our founding fathers in their Sunday best, all looking wise and serene. And yet that summer in Philadelphia was hot and steamy, and I'm not talking just the weather. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of arguments, and a lot of compromise that gave birth to the America that we know today. And so it should give us some comfort to know that this problem has plagued our nation. We didn't invent the problem. We're not suffering through it for the first time. And that should give us comfort that we too shall prevail. We may not know quite how, but I think the 2 steps that I'm going to go through with us tonight might arm us with some skills in that direction. Let me start by saying that the purpose of conversation is not to persuade. The purpose of conversation is to share, to understand, and to learn what the other fellow has to say. We can't bludgeon people to our point of view. We can't badger them to our point of view. We can't insult their values, their humanity, or their intelligence because we don't agree with their point of view. We don't like it when they do that to us, and they don't like it when we do it to them. Why is this so critical right now? This is a necessary step we must take as Democrats and just as citizens in a civilized democratic society. The reason is being anti-Trump is insufficient. There's not enough to persuade people to change their mind if we just continually yammer about Trump. We should have as our targeted behaviors capturing as much as 70% of the electorate as we can. Now, where did I get that figure? Being generous to Clinton and Trump, let's say they both got almost 50%. So if Trump got 50% of the popular vote, and again, being generous with the figures, 60% of Trump people still have faith in him. 60% of 50% is only 30% of the population. So that other 70% is ripe for persuasion if we do it in a smart way. And what I'm hearing and seeing is we haven't learned the smart way yet, from our leadership down to our Thanksgiving tables, where we might want to mention religion and politics. Okay. The other purpose of tonight is that I see you as the grassroots agents for revitalizing the Democratic Party. So we're going to learn 2 skills tonight that I hope will arm you with the courage and the skills to go out and create change. So with that being said, turn to your first page of the outline, where it discusses the purpose of conversation. And this was a philosophical conversation, not a political conversation. My undergraduate degree was part a philosophy degree. And I didn't realize at the time the skills that I was learning and have used throughout my life. So we're going to turn you into philosophical conversationalists tonight. Remembering the purpose, and you select your purpose according to your audience and the time, and you pre-plan how to have a meaningful conversation. That's critically important. And I'm going to talk about several different steps you can take to pre-plan what it is you want to say and how you want to respond to those ridiculous comments that we hear on television and out of the mouths of our favorite Uncle Ned around the kitchen table. Now, this particular first handout was done 6 or 7 years ago, so it's not quite in the order that I would do it today, and I was too busy to change it. So let's start with number 9, which to me right now is number 1. Utilize moral courage to start a conversation. It is scary to initiate a conversation because if they don't agree with you, you feel personally offended. And if you say anything, they're going to feel personally offended and everybody gets into a huff and it goes nowhere. So that means you really got to think about, why is this an important issue that I want to discuss? Why is it important that Sister Sue, Cousin Ethel hears an opportunity to explore the issue, not to be told why she's wrong and why you're right. Okay, so utilizing moral courage to start the conversation. The next one is number 8 on your list. Questions will guide the conversation, so plan ahead to ask good questions. If you want to have a good conversation, be an interviewer, not a preacher. And to guide your thinking, use the 5 W's. For those of you who don't know what the 5 W's are, they're taught, they used to be taught, I suppose they still are, in schools of journalism. So the first paragraph in a well-written newspaper article is who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how. You can use it if you're a teacher to teach kids how to study for a test. I have used it to teach high school kids how to write papers. And you can use that to change your orientation from, let me tell you why the Republican health care plan is a lousy deal for low-income people. Ears just shut down, to, well, let's talk about, what do you know about the health care plan? How do you think it'll work? Why is it appropriate for this time when the insurance companies are still trying to set costs and projections for the next year and it's still changing? Do you think that's the best way to do it? What would you do if you were the president and you wanted to be equitable? Should we be equitable in healthcare? What does it mean to be equitable? Okay, so you get the point, and you don't do it interrogation style, you do it conversationally. At the beginning, I'm going to suggest you write your questions down. The questions that you want to ask to hear what your best friend or your long-lost college roommate or your cranky Uncle Al might have to say about the issue if it came up. Let me see, number 3. Understand is really number 1 on your list. Sorry to do this to you. Understand, appreciate, and carefully use the differences between facts and opinions. Facts can be verified often in more than one way. Opinions are our interpretation of facts based upon, and this is important, your philosophy, your personality, and your life experiences. Opinions can be pig-headed, but they can't be wrong if they are authentically arrived at. You are entitled to your opinion. You are not entitled to your set of facts. And you have to let the facts and your philosophy, what you think about life, your personality, whether you're patient, impulsive, whatever, and your life experiences to guide your understanding of the facts so you can conclude what your opinion is. too many people, including us Democrats, start with our opinion, throw in a few facts that we may have heard or maybe even kind of just assumed were true, and that messes it up. It messes it up for the other side, and it messes it up for us. Okay, number 4, which is number 7 on your list. Look for background experiences to help understand people's perspectives. Theoretically, we're trying to replicate the Founding Fathers' experience. They knew where they were coming from. They knew what the Virginian delegates said and wanted. There was a reason why Washington, D.C., was placed where it is. It was payoff to Virginia because back when the Continental Army was started, we also had all those state militias that caused all that problem with the Second Amendment. And so all of the different colonies' legislatures were funding their own state militias. Well, here came the Continental Army, and they said, ooh, our folks need shoes and weapons and clothes and food and what have you. And a lot of the colonies didn't want to pay. Hey, we paid for our fellows, we sent them, you figure out how to do it. Well, Virginia in particular did not want to bear the debts of the other states who, quote, didn't pay their fair share. So the payoff was, you assume more of the debt of the American Revolution, and we'll put the capital close to you. Someday you'll be a tourist destination because people will go through you to get to Washington, D.C. So, understanding people's perspectives is really very handy. It builds bridges of understanding. It builds points where some commonality we might be able to agree on. We may not agree on the outside details. There might be 1 or 2 points. Okay, let me see. 5, use definitions, including antonyms and synonyms, to clarify thoughts and to form the basis of a conversation. No good philosopher starts a conversation without defining his terms. I remember probably my first philosophical conversation was in the 10th grade. And I had a good friend who was a Southern Baptist, and I wasn't. And we had a mutual good friend who was Jewish. And Connie one day, just in passing, said, well, you know, Art's not going to heaven. Well, Art was a good guy. And I said, why isn't Art going to heaven? Well, he hasn't been saved. I said, what do you mean? And we went round and round and round and round. Well, of course he's a good guy, until we realized her definition was here and my definition was here. Okay? So, definitions are important. I want to jump to use comparisons and contrasts. Comparisons are similarities, contrasts are differences. Let me give you an example. I taught at Lee High School. I taught 9th through 12th grade kids with learning disabilities for just a little bit. And they knew every Wednesday we wrote in my class. They came through the door knowing if it's Wednesday, you're going to write an essay. The very first essay, I would get fired today, hands down. The very first essay that I asked my 9th to 12th graders to write was euthanasia, murder or mercy killing. And first I had to explain I was not talking about the teenagers in China, that euthanasia was a term that had to define your term. I gave them 7 minutes to have, I mean it was highly timed because I only had the class period to do it. I gave them 7 minutes just to have their, well, my aunt was really sick and in a lot of pain and she kept telling us she wanted to let go and go. Well, my Uncle Richard said that would be murdering her. I mean, the kids just, and they reflected what? Their personal experiences, which is what shaped their opinion. At the end of 7 minutes, I pulled up the map. Back in the olden days, we had maps that went up on the blackboard, and there was the outline that guided their thinking. They wrote 5 paragraph themes, and this particular one was compare and contrast. Is euthanasia mercy killing in your opinion, or is it murder? I didn't care what they thought. I wanted them to develop the thinking skills and the writing and the articulation skills. So these are kind of esoteric and they take working. We don't have time to do it tonight, but I put it out there and that's an example. Use examples to broaden people's thinking, not to prove a point. Your examples are an N of 1 or 2 that is insufficient to make anything ironclad. But you use an example in case that's not their experience. to broaden their thinking about whatever the issue is. You have to be careful because examples of one or two are anecdotal evidence and that's insufficient, but you're softening up the flags, you see, when you do that. Beware of and look for unintentional consequences to keep the arguments balanced. Always look for upsides and downsides. Almost everything has an upside and a downside. Life does, people do, and there's no reason for us to be naive about the fact of the law of unintended consequences. And it is to our benefit if we can acknowledge it's not perfect. Here's the problems that will need to be fixed. If we take it a little bit more time with the Affordable Care Act, we probably would be, truthfully, we probably would be further along today. We didn't want to think about the downsides, the cost, the communication, the ironing out the glitches, and of course it was very embarrassing when people couldn't even navigate the website. It made us look like a bunch of doofuses. Okay. I think I've covered everything on this page. Now, deductive and inductive reasoning. I love that, but it's pretty esoteric if you're not just into philosophy. But let's talk about it a little bit. It's number 4 on your list. Inductive reasoning goes from examples to the rule. It's very powerful reasoning. It's how you learn your grammar and your vocabulary. In other words, if you speak the Queen's English perfectly, it's because you were surrounded by examples of the Queen's English. If you speak good old Appalachian English, we ain't got none of them today, it's because you were surrounded by those examples. Now, there's a right and a wrong. I mean, we like all of our students and our friends and ourselves to speak so that we are impressive or able to articulate clearly. But an example of inductive reasoning might be, I did recently that presentation on poverty, statistics, and possible solutions. And I used nothing but the census data and HHS data. No blogs, no Democratic, Republican Party statistics, nothing. I went to the source, as it were. And this is what I learned. 60% of the people getting government benefits are the working poor. The 2 benefits they use the most, and you could name it just as well as I can, food stamps and health support. So, if those are examples, then from that comes the question, so what do you think we ought to do for the working poor? They're working as many hours a week as they can, sometimes just 30 because there were 35, because that's the new definition of full-time. And if we have time, I'm going to give you some statistics later on. So what would be the rule for dealing with these kinds of people? One of them is we turn our back. Tough luck. If you want to make more money, get more education. And then we get angry because that's, of course, easier said than done. Deductive was something we get the Wall Street Journal, which is a conservative newspaper, but they do their homework. I don't agree with everything that's in it, but it broadens my thinking. And so one of the articles from this past Saturday was an article on reducing the health care subsidies that Trump just slashed a bit. It will affect people, single people, making from $12,000 to $30,000 a year. And so we go back to the 5 W's. What do you do with people that work, make money, maybe have a family or don't, but they still have rent and utilities and a car payment and we want them to be responsible citizens, so we assume they're paying renter's insurance or car insurance and gas and utilities. And how do we handle that? And let them be the ones to square it, rather than you say, well, I think that's really inhumane of you to tell a working person that, sorry, you don't get health care in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. That stops the conversation. If you ask the questions, it puts the burden on their shoulders. But that is going from the rule to the example. The other, the working poor, goes from the example to the rule. It's just 2 different ways to get into a conversation. Okay, I know that time is important, so let's skip to the next one. Now, we're going to move to a little more pointedness, but there's replication and duplication here. Do not leap to hasty conclusions or action steps. Wait for more of the story to emerge before you begin to accuse or defend. Now, I have good friends that I've known for probably 40 years, far right. She grew up in a wealthy Catholic family, went to private Catholic school. We had our Women's Philosophical Society meeting a couple of weeks ago. It's a little group that we, four of us, when we get together for lunch, we don't talk about grandchildren or trips we've taken. We discuss an issue or a philosophical concept. We've done honor, we've done just fairness. Is fairness, everybody gets the same and then it's the same and it's fair? Or is fairness, you tilt it a little bit so the result is potentially the same? And anyway, we were talking about values, and she's a rule follower. That's one of her top 3 values. She values honesty and following rules. Catholic girls' school, Hollywood High School in California, wealthy family with expectations, and a husband who was a very high up Air Force official. So of course we're going to differ. She called me one night all upset and said, California is going to let undocumented aliens into their college system rather than American citizens from other states. And I said, wait. And I said, let's talk. I said, you're talking about the public state universities. Yes, and I think it's terrible that we are preferencing undocumented immigrants over tax-paying citizens. And I said, okay, wait a minute. I happen to know a little bit about state universities and colleges. And I said, you know, every state college has out-of-state tuition. It beefs up the revenues, it provides perhaps a little more diverse population. But I am sure that every state institution is very careful of not becoming the University of Georgia instead of being the University of Alabama. A little bit of Georgia is nice, but we're Alabama, or we're Auburn, or we're Athens State. We're not the University of Macon or the University of whatever else. I said, that's a balancing act. And they have to be careful because they can float their budgets on the back of the out-of-state transfers. So they have, the state colleges have a commitment to their own citizens, their own people that live in the state, whether they're an American citizen or not. Well, by the time we got through talking, she was really confused. And she said, well, you just know a lot. And,
shame on you.
So that's what I mean. She jumped to conclusions because it hit her red buttons. Okay. Ask a lot of clarifying questions. Some of this is redundant, especially about their strategy and its consequences. Interviewers, you think of Barbara Walters and Larry King, and I'm showing my age now, you young people, they used to be interviewers back in the dark ages. They controlled the conversation by their questions. They still do, even the ones today. And you can do this also. You might learn something, we might learn something by asking the questions and just letting them talk. Do your homework. Do not go into battle without facts and figures. Start your file system. Back in the Stone Ages, when we still wrote on tablets and stones, not this kind of a tablet, librarians used to have something called a vertical file. And it truly was vertical. It was a vertical file cabinet. And librarians had the leisure to read newspapers and magazines and clip articles that they thought would help kids do research. So if you were doing the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, you could go in the file and see if they had anything from National Geographic on the, okay? And I'm suggesting that all of us need to have our own vertical file where you clip articles, you jot down notes when you hear them from TV station or NPR or newspaper that you read, always being sure that in your mind you understand the differences between facts and opinions. And if we have time tonight, I'm going to give you some examples of the kinds of thinking that occurs if you're just armed with some facts. Okay. Reduce your knee-jerk reactions based on the source of the information. Now, in our home, I used to really like CNN. And when we travel, we always listen to CNN International or BBC. I think CNN is doing a terrible disservice to our point of view, even though they think they're perpetrating. You can't turn CNN on and they're not bashing Trump for something. And he may deserve it, but it gets a little old after a while. He says it, and then 7 to 8 they tell you what he said, and then 8 to 9 a different set of talking heads repeat it again. You can understand why Republicans think CNN is out to lunch. So if you go on the CNN website, there's a box where you can communicate to the station, the network itself. And so I said, you've lost your balance. As far as anyone knows, looking at CNN, the world isn't doing anything. They're all standing there with bated breath to see what foolish thing Trump's going to do. And we know that's not true. So we end up with an uneducated, ignorant population. We look like idiots to any foreigner who comes over. And so we switch back and forth. I'm always interested to see if CNN is saying this, what's Fox saying?
That is a fascinating exercise.
Yes, it is. Sometimes they make you grit your teeth, and sometimes they actually talk about something besides the immediate political issue. I mean, they talk about it too,
Yeah.
obviously, but they're a little broader, not in their understanding of my perspective of the issues, a little broader in their coverage. So, and see, several of you kind of went like this when I was saying it. We can't judge the source. We got to listen and follow up and do our homework.
Small doses, just small doses.
Yes,
At first.
yes. Just first. Okay, they're doing that, and then back to it. You turn it off altogether, which is also a good.
It would be a very good source of identifying the difference between facts and opinions.
Yes.
There's not enough stuff happening for a 24-hour news channel.
That's true.
So they have to make things up.
Okay,
And it's their opinion much more than there are facts.
but they would say the same thing about us, and that becomes a zero.
But I'm talking about both sides.
Yes,
In
yes.
any
Yes,
24-hour
you are
news
correct.
channel.
Yes, you are
So
correct.
where do you get your facts? You were talking about you know a lot. Your friend said you know a lot.
I read a lot, I read various sources. I go on the internet, I read no blogs. We read the Wall Street Journal, the Huntsville Times, Time Magazine. My husband reads several business magazines that I glance at. I read books.
Oh, yeah, well.
I read certain websites on the internet, but I'm careful. I'm not interested in hearing what someone thinks. I want to know what somebody knows. Difference. Okay, I want to go back to reducing your knee-jerk reactions. Everybody has red buttons. When the Women's Philosophical Society met, we talked about our red buttons, and I said, you know what really gripes me? And I have a whole row of perfect attendance Sunday school pins, belong and am active to 2 churches. It really gripes me when someone says, you liberal, atheist, lack of values people. That offends me. And I said this to this group of friends, and we are all philosophically kind of different. A Baptist friend said, you're right, you know what irritates me? She said, it really bothers me when people say, you Baptists are all a bunch of Bible toters, and you don't ask any questions, and you marry your relatives. And I said, your cousin, you marry your cousin. And I said, I didn't know you and Joe were related. And so see, everybody has a red button. Everyone in this room has some kind of a red button that gets you going. And it is our responsibility as civilized conversationalists to know what they are and not to get baited. But it is also our responsibility not to go out of our way to be offensive and bait the people. I mean, they don't like being told they're heartless. They don't like being told that they don't care about anything but money. Even if you can think it, but you can't say it if you want to have a conversation that might get us to a common place. So you want to be aware of your biases, and be able to articulate your sources. It's very opening to say, you know, I'm really biased in favor of X, Y, Z for this reason. What are you biased in favor of? Notice it's positive. We all have biases for and against things, but you're trying to have a positive conversation. So, what do you know you're biased about? And where did you come to that? Now, for me, I'm biased in favor of big government. And I don't mind saying that to anyone, and here's why. I was told in no uncertain terms by a very flamboyant Democrat that he did not understand why Alabama was turning conservative, because if anyone had been the beneficiary of big government, it was the South. TVA, rural electrification, and on and on and on and on. So I am firmly of the opinion that there are some things that only big government can do. Secondly, I have been the beneficiary of big government. My master's degree and my PhD were both funded in part by federal grants. In fact, part of my education was paid for, I always thought this was so humorous, by the National Defense Funds. The idea being an educated populace, one, has a job and pays taxes, two, supports and can think about things. And so from my perspective, big government, well, it does overstep its bounds. It does. But I have a bias towards that. Now, my brother, who owns a small business in Florida, it's an ecological tour business with airboats going through the swamps, looking at the alligators and the bald-headed eagles, etc. He and I don't agree on anything, and we have wonderful, spirited political conversations. We never get angry with each other. He thinks I'm a little pointy-headed intellectual, and I think he thinks too black and white about things. He said, let me just tell you, if you're a small businessman in Florida, he said, the city will get you, the county will get you, the state will get you, and the feds will get you. And he said, by the time you finish dancing through all the hoops, and he knows what he's talking about because he has to do it. And he can specify the regulations that he thinks get in the way of people trying to earn a living. And I have to take that into account because when I started Skills for Success after I retired from education, I paid taxes on what I made. I paid taxes on my office equipment when I bought it. Imagine my surprise the first year when I got a tax bill for owning the office equipment. Now, at one point, I was going to run against Howard Sandifer, and he knew it. Anyway, I called my local representative, and I said, Howard, I'm a Democrat, so I don't mind paying taxes, but I think 3 taxes on the same thing is a bit much, don't you? And he said, as a Republican, oh, Liz, I know what you mean. He said, down in Montgomery, he said, we don't have any professional lobbyists like the AMA or the ADA or the Lawyers and Tort Attorneys Association or anything. He said, we're sitting ducks. If they need money, they know they can stick it to the small fella because we're not organized enough to protest it. So we had a little bit of commonality. He said, I know what you mean. I have a small business, grinds my teeth every time I have to do it too. So I guess the point that I am trying to make is be aware of your biases, be aware of your values, understand why you feel the way you do, and encourage the person who doesn't agree with you to search why they feel the way they do, in facts, not opinions. Because you notice I said my education was funded in part by the federal government. I mean, I had scholarships and grants, but I was aware that the national defense, whatever the last word was part of where my fellowship money came from. My brother can give you chapter and verse about which regulations have cost him money and hassle and aggravation. Okay, look for areas of commonality and compromise. You might want to start in your questioning sequence, what can we agree on? Is there anything about this issue? Now, this is where pre-thinking will help your case, because you may have already identified 2 or 3 points of potential commonality. And so when you ask the question and you've hit them, well, geez, no, I don't think there's anything we have in common. You know you're going to ask the question, you've already done the thinking. Well, what do you think? You don't tell, well, I think we have X, Y, Z in common. No. Well, what do you think? Is it possible that X, Y, Z would be something we could agree on as a beginning point? Recognize the difference between fact and opinion. Once I know I'm doing a presentation, every time I read something, it gets clicked. This was a horoscope for sometime in the last month, and I clipped it because it was pertinent to tonight. My horoscope was, people who make decisions based strictly on how they feel may worry you. Do we think? Yes. But no more than those who decide strictly based on research, spreadsheets, and cost comparisons. And I thought, well, I mean, it could be a horoscope for anyone, except that it happened to reflect my thoughts because I was thinking about this. And so, that balance between facts and opinions is helpful to keep in mind. Watch your emotions. Do not be manipulated by emotion, and don't do it to others. And leave number 10. We'll do that later. Okay, so how do you practice emotional constraint when you're having a conversation with someone that you don't agree with, they don't agree with you, you're starting to wonder if you like them, you're pretty sure you probably don't, and they're probably thinking the same thing. Okay, cite your sources or ask for sources of facts. Be honest in your search and representation of your facts. That's why my friend said, well, you know, I didn't know that much. I knew a few facts based on my background experience. We also had a conversation about abortion. Sitting in the car one night, coming home from the symphony. The husband didn't want to go, and maybe it was the art museum. We went somewhere. And I wanted to test this. And I said, I already know how you feel about this subject. Because one, I knew her, and two, she was Catholic, generally speaking. And so we talked about it a little bit, and I'd done some homework, not a lot, but some. And she said, well, Liz, I'm just absolutely appalled at you. Now, we've been friends for 40 years, and oh, wow, you know, I didn't want to ruin the relationship. So we continued to talk. I did not let that get in the way. Oh, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Let me tell you why I feel the way I do about the part of the topic we just talked about. I didn't get home for 5 minutes before she called. And she said, Liz, I want you to understand, I was not appalled at you. I was appalled at your lack of logic. Which made it much better, because see, I thought my logic between beginning of life and end of life issues was very congruent. I thought her logic about beginning of life and ending of life issues was not logical. But it was a baby step. And I said, fine, I think we have to talk some more. Maybe a week later, she said, we really do need to continue that conversation. I've done some homework. And I said, I have too. And so when we get together, we just haven't, it hasn't been pertinent to do that. But see, it's out there. Am I going to change your mind? Probably not. Is she going to change my mind? Probably not. But we can talk about it. And maybe in the talking, because folks, I'll just tell you, I don't think there's any research, any factual research we can do that won't turn up surprises for them and for us. And for us to pretend that our side has the side of goodness, justice, and freedom for everyone, while their side is repressive and whatever, is wrong. And they catch us on it. If we can't talk about the cost of the feel-good things we think are important for our government, we're letting our side down. And we're opening ourselves to a very legitimate, well, how can we afford to do health care for everybody? You've got to be able to answer that question, which means you've got to find out, how do they support health care in France and England and China and Canada? And again, I know people from some of those areas, and so I have some rudimentary answers. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert in any of it, but, okay. Use qualifying words in your statements of facts. May, some, many, unless you know exactly what your facts represent. But it's almost better to use qualifiers rather than absolutes. Everyone, always, never. That's going to sink your ship, because they'll find the one exception, and that will, in their eyes, abolish your argument. Preface your opinions with, I think, or it is my opinion. Now, some of us can be pretty emphatic in our opinions. Some of the TV commentators can be pretty emphatic in their opinions. And we always have to remember that just because you say something emphatically doesn't change it from an opinion to a fact. And we know that there are certain people that think not John Lennon, what's the man on CNN? I like him, he's cute, but he's very impassioned. Isn't his last name Lemon?
Yeah.
Don Lemon, and his counterpart on Fox. They speak very enthusiastically and emphatically to their point of view. But you really gotta listen, is that a fact or an opinion? They're entitled to their opinion, but facts are what prove the case. Start with the definition. Watch your tone of voice. If other people get angry, acknowledge the intensity and suggest a calming step. Time out, stop the conversation. With my friend, let's talk about this some more later on. We've started the conversation, and it's interesting. It's fun to have a conversation even if you don't win at the end. Recognize the validity and the authenticity of others' views. What experiences have you had that makes you feel this way? That same friend is part of this little woman's philosophical group, and when she identified one of her top 3 values as being honest and truthful and following the rules, I understood why she felt the way she does about abortion. Okay? Ask clarifying questions. What do you mean? Why do you think that would work? How would you solve it? Recognize weaknesses in your own arguments and acknowledge them. No perspective is 100% perfect. Keep the purpose of the conversation in mind. It may be helpful to reiterate it during the course of the conversation. Let's remember, we're just doing this for an intellectual exercise, where we're doing this to understand ourselves and your view a little bit better. We're doing it because it's important for American democracy that we can, even if we don't agree, that we can still have a civil conversation. Okay, now we're going to do the political junkies pledge on the last page. Repeat after me. I promise to keep my emotions in check. With me. I promise
to keep my emotions in check.
I
promise not to dismiss the other guy's point of view just because I disagree with it.
I
Promise to refrain from using labels while discussing issues. I promise not to repeat facts without checking them or at least citing my sources. I promise to seek understanding and possible solutions rather than bludgeoning the other guy with my arguments.
Now, in that same high school class, 9th through 12th grade, of kids with learning disabilities, and in Florida where I taught junior high school and public speaking and playwriting and all that kind of stuff, I honest to goodness had junior high school kids. They were below average functioning level, but the state curriculum said you had to read Romeo and Juliet. And I thought, these kids can't read English. How are they going to read Shakespearean English? But we had to do it. So I divided the class into 5 groups, because every Shakespearean play has 5 acts, and this group did Act 1, Act 2, and so on and so on, and I said, your job is to read the 1 act, figure out what on earth is going on, who the Capulets are, and who the Montagues are, and what Juliet said, how Romeo reacted, for your play, your portion. And you can write it in any kind of English. You can do it in hip-hop, jive, Appalachian English, television English, I don't care. But you've got to write it in play form so that I know you understand what was going on. Then when they'd all done that, we put it all together. We had removable placards, so you got to be Juliet for Act 1, and your little group, you said, I'll be Juliet for, so we switched the placards so everybody knew what was going on. Then we all watched the movie version of Romeo and Juliet. My kids understood, as much as middle school kids can, the issues of Romeo and Juliet by processing it that way. Furthermore, I had them all do debates. Their final exam was a spontaneous speech. These were junior high school kids. And I sat at the back of the room with some kind of a bowl with topics. And I would call their name, and they would have the time from when they pulled the topic and read it and turned around and walked to the front of the room and gave a 2-minute speech. I would have been fired for that too. The junior high school kids aren't supposed to be able to do that. I taught debate to those seniors, and we debated, which will age me, but you already know it's the Stone Ages. This was when the woman's Equal Rights Amendment was being kicked around. So I said, well, let's debate it. We had boys and girls in the class, and I taught the format for a debate. It's not esoteric knowledge, and it really structures your thinking and your arguing quite well. So, if junior high school kids can do it, and high school kids with learning disabilities can do it, everyone in this room can do it, and here's the format for political thinking. The statement of the issue, think a debate approach. The debate approach, the first positive does the history, first negative gives their view, second positive does the solutions, second negative does their point of view, and then they have a rebuttal time. It's a structure for organizing your thinking. So, what we know about it that we can agree on. So that might be your first step. Let's just jot down 2 or 3 things that we can agree on. Healthcare is a problem. That we can agree on. It's an opinion, but there's enough facts out there. You know, your problem may not be the problem I'm seeing, but we can agree it's a problem that needs some solution. We can't just rub our hands and walk away from it. The questions that need to be asked. In a debate, you see, you would be building in your answers to those questions. Possible solutions, that means you and they, we and they, have to play politician president for a day. What would I do if I had these terrible decisions and issues to pursue and come to some kind of a solution? And then the acid test, the pros and cons of each solution. They'll love your cons, and we will love their cons, because it means at least we're not saying, I'm right and you're the dumbest dodo I have talked to in the last 24 hours. Okay. So that's the first part of the 2 skills that I wanted to discuss tonight. And I meant to say when I started this that I made up these 2 steps. You, I'm sure, will tell me if they're complete ridiculousness. I expect you to. I want the feedback. I think they're good steps, but they may be a bunch of malarkey. Because if you are kind of on board with the first one, the second one, you may say, you gotta be kidding, Liz. I could sure tell you were a teacher in another lifetime. Okay. The second step is to create in yourselves the change agents that the Democratic Party needs. Okay? And I think there's a couple of off-the-wall steps you can take. The first is to lower the tone and start the conversation. This is to make our points. You identify, I would suggest the Democratic women as a grassroots option. And remember, grassroots work. Trump made it work. His was a grassroots at the beginning. We may not like that fact, but it was. So if he can do it, we can do it. So each of you, if I were active in the Democratic women, which I'm not right now, I would suggest you get into a study group of 2 to 3 each. Identify the critical issues you care about. Immigration, abortion, defunding Planned Parenthood, equal justice, whatever your pet issues are. That's your first step. The second step is to do your homework within the study group. Okay, you're going to look up, remember that debate, you're going to look up the history of abortion. You're going to look up the facts and the statistics. Who gets them, why they get them, how many, is it getting bigger, is it getting smaller, the number? And I'll look up how other countries deal with the issue. You put together what I call a white paper. Now, I trained special ed teachers for a number of years, and I told them that they're always a minority in a school. They're usually, it's a little better now, but back in the olden days, I taught in the bookstore at the old Lee High School. They converted it to a tiny little classroom, half the size of this. And it was important that special ed teachers be trained how to make their voices heard to principals, to department chairs, and whatever. And I trained them to do this. I call it a white paper. And this is how you do a white paper in your little study groups after you divvy up the homework. Number 1, state the issue. I would do it as a question and underline. Number 2, the facts about the issue. How many, number increasing, decreasing, whatever. I found, for example, that 23% of the abortions are performed on Catholics. Okay, that's an interesting statistic that they need to grapple with. And I have to not go, bam, when I talk with my friend today. The third part, the issue, the facts, Possible solutions, pros and cons, and recommended solution. It's called a white paper, 1 to 2 pages, no more. It's not a term paper, it's a white paper. President Trump uses them all the time. I just read in a New Yorker magazine article that he likes 1 to 2 page summaries of almost any issue. So, you identify your issues, you do your homework and study groups, you develop a white paper. The issue, the facts about it, possible solutions, pros and cons of each solution, and then the recommended solution. My program at the college where I taught got large, and it was an expensive program because we trained the teachers how to do individualized testing, which meant we had to have a lot of those expensive tests. And they wanted me to keep the administration wanted me to keep the program. I did a work paper for the president of the college, and I said, here's the problem. Our numbers, our budget is not keeping up with our numbers. I need adjuncts to teach extra sections. I need money for the states, the tests that we're training them on. So the solution was, give me more budget, and I'll be glad to train as many special ed teachers as want to come. Or, if the money is not available because of budgetary constraints, allow me to close the program. So, see, there's the issue, here's the facts, here's the 2 options, my preference and what it was, which was to close the program, because I knew there was no money. The president came to me, and it's a long time ago, so he said, Liz, I've never done this before. Don't tell anyone that you talked a program into closing its numbers. And I never have until tonight. I hope he's not listening. But the point is, white papers can be powerful because they force you to get your act together. Now, what are you going to use these white papers for? You're going to use them perhaps, because now they're fact-based, with opinion, but based on facts. You can use them as thoughtful letters to the editor, and I have one that I thought was interesting. I did not read the article in the Wall Street Journal because we only get Saturdays. It takes us 3 days just to get through it with everything else going on. But it was written by William Brown, who was the president of the National Association of Realtors. And it had to do with the tax reform and the fact that certain deductions were going to be sliced. And he said, we support, speaking of the realtors, we support fiscally responsible tax cuts. Unfortunately, that isn't what a careful read of the recently released framework for tax reform represents. And then he quotes his sources. Our research on the House Republican blueprint earlier this year found that a tax reform plan with a nearly doubled standard deduction, a loss of personal exemptions, and the elimination of deductions like state and local deduction would deliver an average tax increase of $815 on middle-class homeowners. That's us, folks, okay? Our earlier read of the framework finds that it's a little different, meaning he looked at the first, they researched the first one, and now they're talking about this next one that's floating. But don't just take our word for it, they're going to cite their source. The Tax Policy Center noted in their analysis that nearly 30% of earners between $50,000 and $150,000 income would see their taxes go up. That isn't Washington's spin. It's calling out a tax hike for exactly what it is. And here's the closing opinionated argument. Defending middle-class homeowners isn't greedy. Apparently, the article said that they were just looking out for mortgagees and real estate agents and that kind of thing. Defending middle-class homeowners isn't greedy because home ownership is not a special interest. It's a common interest. We intend to defend it. I wanted to stand up and clap. You can tell they've done their homework. They know what the issues are, they know the pros and cons, and so that's your first use of the white paper, to make you a more effective writer, of less on opinions and name calling and more on educating the people who might read your letter. Okay. The second use, this is where it gets a little airy-fairy, and I know you'll tell me if you think it's crazy. The second use is to give it to our candidates. I mean, if the Democratic women comes up with 5 or 6 white papers on critical issues and sends them to every candidate and says, we can support the arguments in these papers, it helps them become more precise thinkers and talkers as they campaign. Rather than, I have 2 children, my wife Mabel and I have been married for 17 years, and oh, there's our French poodle, and we go to the Methodist Church, which is what so many of the handouts say. And we're back to judging people on personality rather than what their positions are. So I think we can really help our candidates with their talking points. They have to trust that we've done it accurately and correctly. 3, this is where I really start dreaming big. Send them to the county, state, party officials. Let them know that the Democratic Party, the women in Huntsville, Madison County, have some moxie, have the facts, and they're willing to help the party. And then I get even crazier and say, put them in a binder and ship them to the National Democratic Party, because I don't think they're doing our candidates much of a favor. I don't think our leaders are, because they sound just like we do. It's all emotion. Well, that law's not going to pass if we have anything to say about it. How does that help anything? They need the facts too. Now they have all the lobbyists and their college-educated staffers doing white papers for them. But I want them to know that in Huntsville, Madison County, a grassroots of men and women, grassroots organization of men and women, are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk. I would even go so far as to figure out a way to put them on the push cards so that when you're asked to go knock on doors and say, please vote for Joe Blow because he's a really good guy, to say, here's some information for you to think about. They're based on facts, we've cited our sources, we hope you'll read it. Okay, I'm a teacher, and so apparently I have a reputation for giving homework. So your homework for tonight, to help you think, to begin your thinking, and I wish we had more time, we'd break into groups and do it because it's a really fun experience. What are your 3 or 4 political values? What's important to you? What are your 3 or 4 economic values? And what are your 3 or 4 social values? That will get you started because you'll begin to understand why you feel so strongly about that which you feel.
How do you define social value?
Well, social values to me would be the whole abortion, homosexuality, you know. I really don't care. I mean, I have my opinion, but I think everybody's entitled to their opinion. But you should figure out, I feel this way because these values are important to me. They're my driving values in the social arena. These are my driving values in the political arena, and these are my driving values in the economic arena. It's not easy. You really have to kind of think about it, but it's very good intellectual exercise, and you will discover things about yourself, and then if you share them with others, as that little group of women did, we became much more understanding of each other, and in a way closer. We still disagree, but now we know we can talk, and we know that that's important to you because one of your top values is everybody following the rules because the rules make sense out of chaos. That's a legitimate point of view. Okay? Okay. And finally, I think our parties are in disarray, Republican and Democrat. They have been in disarray before. Handled creatively, it's a creative, constructive disarray. Handled poorly, and we dither and we lose momentum and direction as a nation. You can start the change from the grassroots up, just as Trump did. Take action and be the change agents, and maybe the elections of 2018 will restore equilibrium and community to America. Go get them, folks. Now I'm ready to get started.
study groups together. Are you guys ready to get study groups together? Yeah. Let's do this. Let's do this. I think that's a great idea. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I got a couple of announcements. On November the 2nd is our Madison County Democratic Women's regular luncheon, and Doug Jones, our candidate for U.S. Senate, will be the speaker there. It'll be a buffet luncheon. It starts at 11:30. The luncheon is $20 if you care to eat. If you don't, just come on and join us and hear Doug. On that evening of November the 2nd, there's going to be a fundraiser at 125 Bordeaux Lane, which is my home, from 5:30 to 7:30. And everybody is welcome. There's no minimum. Just come out. If you feel like donating. If not, just come on out and meet Doug Jones. Thank y'all so much for coming out.
Thank you, Pam.